Aircraft and cars have always had strong connections. Everyone's seen the Saab ads starring jets, sometimes not even Saab ones, or heard of the Honda jet in Fiat's World War II fighters. But what about helicopters, some of the most complicated aircraft ever to take to the sky? There's only one car company mad enough to take that challenge on: Citroen. Specifically, 1970s Citroen. I thus present the story of the RE2. In the early 1970s, the Wankel rotary engine was in trouble. The 1973 oil crisis and the NSU RO80's reputation for unreliability meant that very few customers were now willing to buy into the novel technology. And Citroen was a company infamous providing customers with exactly that: novel technology. Naturally, this meant that they had developed their own rotary engine, and it wasn't just meant to be some niche offering for the back of the brochure. No, this was planned to be big. Well, maybe not big. Rotaries are usually smaller than piston engines after all, but you know what I mean. Citroen's new engine had already seen limited use in the M35 customer test cars and the short-lived GS birotor, but plans for a larger unit in the CX never materialised. New developments being at least partially successful in this era was critical for the company, as we have to remember that, unlike nowadays, Citroen wasn't part of some larger conglomerate. It was a company that plied most of their trade in Europe, Africa and South America, with a relatively small yet fiercely loyal customer base. The rotary engine project becoming a total loss could take the whole company down with it, so a new use had to be found. In my opinion, taking advantage of its small size would be key for reviving the engine's hopes. I'm thinking of something like a boat motor, but that's not the direction Citroen went. No, they had much higher ambitions. Literally. Presumably chosen because some higher-ups confused rotary wing with rotary engine, a helicopter was the machine Citroen chose to chuck their near-failure engine into. It was a bold move, to put it mildly, and would be an interesting test for the company's engineers and designers. How to transfer automotive know-how to aircraft? Citroen's answer to this problem was uncharacteristically simple. They just brought on renowned French helicopter engineer Charles Marchetti. Marchetti was heavily involved in the development of the Alouette II, one of the most iconic helicopters of all time. Ironically, Citroen's had been used in the Alouette II's promotional material, with the fourgonette being lifted to show the cargo potential of the craft. Citroen also had to hire a test pilot to actually fly the eventual creation, and thus Dominique Gilles was brought onto the project as well. In terms of design, the resulting RE2 was a rather pretty thing, despite the murky olive green colour it was painted in. It reminds me a little of the Robinson R22 and R44. The engine was positioned in a covered compartment behind the cockpit, and was largely the same unit as used in the GS birotor, albeit with a new fuel injection system instead of the original carb. The origins of the engine aside, the RE2's performance would be comparable to other helicopters of the era, a great achievement considering it was not only built by Citroen, but was their first aircraft design as well. And yes, that performance wasn't just on paper. Citroen's helicopter, it sounds so absurd out loud, first flew in 1975, only 2 years after the project's start. That's a quicker development cycle than the vast majority of cars. It wasn't just some prototype to show to investors either. Citroen would then move on to the process of getting it officially homologated for sale. This, again, went smoother than expected, with an overheating issue the only real concern for the regulators and inspectors. By this point, Peugeot had bought Citroen, which you would think would spell the end for such a mad project. After all, many Citroen purists consider Peugeot's involvement as when the real Citroen died, with their mandates for part sharing and a more mainstream appeal. Aircraft, though, were a different story. Thanks to Dassault, Aerospatiale and Airbus, France was an enormous exporter of aircraft, both military and civilian, and the RE2's potential led Peugeot to allow development to continue. 2 years after the first flight, the craft was assigned a temporary 6-month operations permit, as now the French armed forces were showing interest. It was not to be, though, as the RE2 still hadn't received the final certification by the time Peugeot pulled the plug in 1979. The company had recently made a huge and risky investment through the buyout of Chrysler Europe, and had no more time for Citroen's aviation-based shenanigans. Thankfully, and perhaps surprisingly considering the general attitude towards preserving aircraft prototypes at the time, the RE2 wasn't scrapped, instead being sent to one of Citroen's display collections, where it still resides today. So Citroen's helicopter plans never took off, but they are far from the only car company that was involved in aircraft. I mentioned Saab, Honda and Fiat in the introduction, but I think the closest equivalent to the Citroen would be the Bugatti Model 100. Like the Citroen, this was a single prototype, although series production was never a consideration. Ironically, restoration of the airframe, abandoned during the war, started in 1971, around the same time as development work on the RE2. Depending on how this video performs, I may make a similar episode about the Model 100 itself, and any other non-notable road vehicles built or planned by car manufacturers. The Honda Jet, Vauxhall Motors Churchill Tank, Aston Martin AM37, there are far more than you might think. So look out for those in the future, and in the meantime, when people bring up Mazda having the coolest rotary vehicles, just remember, Citroen was leagues above the rest. Literally. Thanks for watching.